It's wonderful to see you all again. I've got an extraordinary tale to tell you today.
"Give me your seat," Bianca Vane snapped, her voice cutting through the polite hum of the Sterling family dinner. "You don't look like you belong at the head of a table this expensive anyway." Cassandra Sterling didn't move. She felt the cold condensation of her water glass against her fingertips, a sharp contrast to the suffocating warmth of the dining room. The scent of stargazer lilies, her mother's favorite, hung heavy in the air, cloying and sweet. Across the table, Julian Vane let out a soft, mocking chuckle, swirling a vintage Bordeaux that Cassandra had personally selected and paid for. "Bianca is right, dear," Evelyn Sterling said, finally looking up from her roasted lamb. She adjusted her silk napkin with a delicate, practiced grace, her silence until that moment having been a loud endorsement of her younger daughter's cruelty. "Julian has a lot of important business to discuss with me regarding the estate's portfolio. It's only natural he sits closer. Why must you always be so difficult about these things?" The two servers by the sideboard remained perfectly still, their eyes fixed firmly on the parquet floor. They had witnessed this dance a dozen times, the quiet, high-powered M&A partner being treated like a stray cat at her own mother's table. Cassandra looked at her sister. Bianca was draped in silk and dripping in diamonds, her face twisted into a smirk of pure, unadulterated entitlement. To Bianca, Cassandra's silence wasn't a sign of strength or professional restraint. It was a white flag. She mistook her sister's patience for a lack of spine, a common mistake among those who had never had to work for anything in their lives. "It's just a chair, Cassie," Julian added, his voice dripping with a patronizing warmth that made Cassandra's skin crawl. He adjusted his tie, the casual confidence of a man who believed his mid-level management position at a logistics firm made him a titan of industry. "Though, I suppose when you spend your days pushing papers in a back office, you get attached to the little bit of status you can find." "Julian is being modest," Bianca chimed in, reaching over to pat her husband's hand. "He's practically running the firm now. Unlike some people who just ride the coattails of the Sterling name, Julian is actually building something. Mother, did he tell you about the new acquisition he's spearheading? It's a massive move." Cassandra felt a familiar vibration against her thigh. She reached into the pocket of her modest, charcoal gray trousers and pulled out her phone. A message from Marcus Thorne flashed on the screen. "The signatures are verified. Vane Logistics is officially under our umbrella as of 5 minutes ago. You own the debt, the assets, and the lease on his corner office. Happy birthday, Cassandra." She stared at the text for a long second. The irony was almost poetic. While Julian sat here bragging about an acquisition, he was blissfully unaware that he was the one being acquired. He was currently drinking wine paid for by the woman who now held his entire professional future in her hands. "Are you even listening?" Bianca demanded, slamming her hand onto the table. The crystal glasses rattled, a sharp, discordant sound in the quiet room. "Or are you checking your little spreadsheets again?" "Honestly, it's no wonder you're still single. No man wants a woman who acts like a robot." Evelyn sighed, a sound of weary disappointment. "Cassandra, please, don't ruin the evening with your moodiness. Just move to the end of the table so we can enjoy our dinner like a proper family." Cassandra tucked her phone back into her pocket. She looked at her mother, seeing the woman who had spent the last decade dismissing her achievements while subsidizing Bianca's failures. She looked at Julian, the enabler who thought he was a king. Finally, she looked at Bianca, the sister who had spent her life trying to stomp out Cassandra's light. The silent shark persona she had cultivated in the boardroom wasn't just a professional tool, it was a survival mechanism. For years, she had let them believe she was the weak one, the boring daughter, the one who didn't quite fit into the glittering social world of the Sterlings. She had let them underestimate her, because it gave her the room to move in the shadows. "You're right, Bianca," Cassandra said, her voice as calm as a frozen lake. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't look angry, she didn't look hurt. She looked like someone who had just finished a very long, very tedious chore. Bianca's smirk widened. See, was that so hard? Cassandra didn't move to the end of the table. Instead, she picked up her silk napkin and placed it neatly beside her untouched plate. She caught the eye of the head server, a man who had worked for the family since she was a child. He was the only one in the room who saw the subtle shift in her posture, the way her shoulders squared and her gaze sharpened. "I don't belong at this table," Cassandra said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "In fact, none of us do. This house is built on the Sterling legacy, but it seems the legacy has run dry of anything resembling character." "Don't you dare speak to me that way in my own house," Evelyn snapped, her face flushing a deep, angry red. Cassandra offered a small, chilling smile. It was the smile that made CEOs tremble during hostile takeovers. "Enjoy the lamb, Mother. And Julian, you might want to check your work email. I imagine your IT department is currently revoking your access codes." She turned on her heel and walked toward the mahogany doors. "Where do you think you're going?" Bianca screamed after her. "You can't just walk out. We're not finished with you." Cassandra didn't stop. She didn't look back. She had spent 30 years being the good daughter, the one who took the insults and paid the bills in silence. That version of Cassandra Sterling had died the moment Marcus Thorne hit send on that verification. As she stepped out into the cool night air, her phone buzzed again. It was a calendar alert for 48 hours from now. Board meeting, Vane Logistics. Agenda, restructuring and immediate terminations. Cassandra climbed into the back of the waiting black sedan. She pulled out her laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in her dark eyes. The game hadn't just changed. She had bought the board, the pieces, and the room they were playing in. And she was only just getting started. The next morning, the sun rose over the glass facade of Vane Logistics with a deceptive brilliance that masked the rot within its executive suites. Julian Vane sat behind his mahogany desk, the sharp, bitter scent of over-extracted espresso filling the room. He adjusted his silk tie in the reflection of his computer monitor, a smug grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. On the desk lay a stack of cardboard boxes, each one filled with the personal effects of employees he'd designated for streamlining. At the very top sat a framed photograph of a young Cassandra Sterling, her face obscured by a coffee stain he'd intentionally left there an hour ago. "Get rid of this trash," Julian said, gesturing to the box as his assistant entered. "And tell HR that if Cassandra shows up to collect her things, she's to be escorted out by security immediately. We don't allow failed associates to loiter in a high-performance environment." The assistant hesitated, eyes darting to the photograph. "But sir, she hasn't been terminated. She's still a senior partner at the firm we—" "She's done," he snapped, the sound of his palm hitting the desk echoing like a gunshot. "My wife and her mother have made that very clear. She's a ghost. Now take the garbage out." As the assistant scurried away with the box, Julian's phone buzzed on the desk. It was Bianca Vane. He put it on speaker, leaning back in his leather chair with an air of unearned victory. "Did you do it?" Bianca's voice was sharp, accompanied by the background clinking of silverware against fine china. She was likely at her usual brunch spot, surrounded by the socialites she used to impress with her sister's money. "The office is being purged as we speak," he replied. "Your mother is already drafting the official statement for the family foundation. Cassandra is being erased from the legacy. By the time the board meeting starts tomorrow, she won't have a leg to stand on." "Good," she said, her tone dripping with a cold, casual cruelty. "Mother said she saw her getting into a car last night like she actually had somewhere to go. The audacity of her, acting like she still belongs in our world. I've already contacted the jeweler. I'm selling that vintage brooch she liked so much. It'll pay for the catering at my anniversary gala. It's not like she'll ever have an occasion to wear it again." Julian chuckled, the sound thick with entitlement. "She'll be lucky if she can afford a bus ticket by the end of the week. I've blocked her access to the corporate accounts." While they laughed, 30 floors above the city's financial district, the atmosphere was entirely different. Cassandra stood in a minimalist office that smelled of expensive parchment and old money. The only sound was the rhythmic, steady ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. She didn't look like a woman who had been erased. She looked like a predator who had finally stopped playing with its prey. Marcus Thorne stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a heavy silver pen balanced between his fingers. He turned, holding out a sleek black tablet. "The final signatures came through at dawn," he said, his voice low and professional. "Vane Logistics thought they were selling their distressed debt to a blind equity fund. They had no idea the Apex Group was a shell company you founded 3 years ago." Cassandra took the tablet, her fingers steady as she scrolled through the digital filings. The blue light reflected in her dark eyes, highlighting a cold, crystalline focus. She touched the screen, opening a document that bore the official seal of the regulatory board. "So, it's official," she said. Her voice was a calm contrast to the vitriol Julian and Bianca had spewed moments before. "More than official," Marcus replied. "You don't just work there anymore, Cassandra. As of 4 hours ago, you are the primary creditor. You hold the notes on their warehouse leases, their fleet contracts, and Julian's personal line of credit." She walked to the window, looking down at the city. Far below, the Vane Logistics logo was visible on a neighboring rooftop, looking small and fragile from this height. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound ledger. It was a record of every cent she had funneled into her family's failing business over the last decade, money they had spent on vanity and spite while mocking her for her modest lifestyle. 36 hours, she whispered, the words tasting like iron. "The board won't know what hit them," Marcus added. "Julian thinks he's walking into a coronation. He has no idea he's walking into an execution." Cassandra didn't smile. The time for smiling would come later, when the arrogance was stripped away and replaced by the raw, shivering reality of what they had lost. She tapped a notification on her screen. It was a message from Evelyn Sterling, her mother, sent to the family group chat. "We've decided to move forward without you, Cassandra. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." She deleted the message without replying. She didn't need words. She had the numbers, the law, and a debt that was finally coming due. "Let them enjoy their brunch," Cassandra said, her voice echoing in the quiet office. "The clock is already ticking." 2 days later, the rain-slicked streets of Mayfair mirrored the cold clarity in Cassandra Sterling's chest. She stood in the soundproofed silence of Marcus Thorne's private office, the scent of expensive leather and aged scotch hanging heavy in the air. Outside, the world was rushing toward a Friday afternoon, oblivious to the financial earthquake Cassandra was about to trigger. Marcus slid a thick, black leather binder across the mahogany desk. Its contents were the culmination of 6 months of forensic accounting and a decade of being overlooked. "The London Protocol," he said, his voice a low rasp of satisfaction. "It's all here, Cassandra. Every diverted fund, every shell company Julian used to subsidize Bianca's lifestyle, and the specific clause in your grandfather's trust that allows for an immediate, non-negotiable clawback in the event of moral turpitude." She ran her fingers over the cool, embossed cover. This wasn't just paper. It was a guillotine. Inside lay the proof that Julian Vane hadn't just been an incompetent manager. He had been a thief, bleeding the Sterling family's charitable foundation to pay off Bianca's mounting gambling debts in Macau. "The board meeting is in 18 hours, Marcus reminded her, leaning back in his chair. He watched her with the clinical interest of a man who enjoyed watching a master at work. "Once you present this, there is no going back. You won't just be firing him. You'll be dismantling their entire existence." "They dismantled mine years ago," she replied, her voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "They just didn't realize I was keeping the pieces." She left the office with the binder tucked securely in her briefcase. She had one more stop to make, a final test of the bridge before she burned it. The Gilded Lily was the kind of restaurant where the flowers cost more than a mid-sized sedan, and the patrons spent more time checking their reflections than their menus. Cassandra found them at the center table, a position of perceived power that Bianca Vane always demanded. Bianca was draped in a vintage Chanel suit, her laughter ringing out like breaking glass as she held court with two of the city's most influential socialites. Julian sat beside her, looking every bit the conquering hero in a bespoke suit that Cassandra knew, with absolute certainty, had been paid for with stolen tuition credits from the family's scholarship fund. As Cassandra approached, the laughter died a choreographed death. Bianca didn't stand. She simply tilted her head, her eyes scanning Cassandra's modest charcoal blazer with a pity that was as sharp as a razor. "Oh, Cassie," Bianca sighed, her tuberose perfume cloying and suffocating. "I didn't think you'd actually show up. I told the maitre d' to keep an eye out for anyone looking." Distressed. "I'm not distressed, Bianca," she said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without being asked. The clatter of the chair legs on the marble floor drew several looks from neighboring tables. Julian smirked, swirling a glass of vintage crystal. "You should be. I heard the news from Evelyn. It's a shame, really. But the firm needs visionaries, not librarians. You've always been better at filing the history than making it." "Is that what you're doing, Julian?" Cassandra asked, her gaze dropping to his wrist. The Patek Philippe he wore was a new addition. "Making history. I'm securing the legacy," he snapped, his arrogance flaring. "Tomorrow, the board will confirm my appointment as CEO of the Sterling Group, and my first act will be to ensure your severance package is as minimal as your contribution has been." Bianca leaned forward, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried to at least 3 other tables. "Honestly, Cassandra, look at you. You look like a ghost at your own funeral. Why don't you just take what's left of your dignity and move to the countryside? We'll even send you a monthly allowance. Out of pity, of course." The socialites at the table snickered, hiding their smiles behind silk napkins. Cassandra felt the familiar heat of rage, but she didn't let it reach her face. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, unassuming silver USB drive. She set it on the white linen tablecloth between them. "What's this?" Julian sneered, glancing at it as if it were a common insect. "Your resume." "It's a courtesy," Cassandra said, her voice dropping to a level that forced them to lean in. "It's a copy of the London Protocol. I thought you might want to read it tonight. It might help you prepare your resignation speech." Bianca let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter. "The London Protocol? You're still playing at being a spy, Cassie. It's pathetic. You have nothing. You are nothing." She reached out and flicked the USB drive off the table with a manicured nail. It clattered onto the floor, rolling toward the feet of a passing waiter. "Pick that up on your way out. It's embarrassing." Julian chuckled, patting Bianca's hand. "Let her have her fantasies, darling. It's all she has left." He looked at Cassandra, his eyes cold and triumphant. "Don't bother showing up tomorrow. Security has already been briefed to revoke your access." Cassandra stood up slowly. She didn't look at the drive on the floor. She looked directly at Julian, then at her sister. She saw the entitlement, the cruelty, and the absolute, unshakable belief that they were untouchable. 18 hours, Cassandra said quietly. "Is that a threat?" Bianca mocked, her voice rising to catch the attention of the room. "Look at her. My poor delusional sister is threatening us. Should we call the police or a psychiatrist?" Cassandra didn't answer. She turned and walked out of the restaurant, the sound of Bianca's mocking laughter following her into the cool evening air. She didn't need the USB drive. She had the original binder, and more importantly, she had the truth. As she stepped into the back of the car where Marcus was waiting, she checked her watch. The countdown was no longer in days, it was in heartbeats. "Did they take the bait?" Marcus asked. "They didn't even look at it," Cassandra said, a ghost of a smile finally touching her lips. "They're so blinded by the sun they don't see the cliff they're standing on." She opened her phone and sent a single text to the board's chairman. "The London Protocol is ready for presentation. See you at 9:00 a.m. The trap was set. All she had to do now was wait for the morning sun to rise on the ruins of their arrogance. The following afternoon, the Sterling Estate's private sunroom smelled of lilies and the sharp, metallic hiss of a professional garment steamer. Cassandra stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her thumb tracing the edge of a matte black tablet. She watched as her sister preened in front of a 3-way mirror, draped in emerald silk that caught the light with every arrogant tilt of her chin. You really should have worn something with more presence, Cassandra, Bianca said, smoothing the fabric over her hips. She didn't look at her sister, only at her own reflection. Tomorrow isn't just a meeting, it's a coronation. When the board sees the growth Julian and I have projected, they'll realize who the real visionary in this family is. Evelyn Sterling sat on the velvet chaise lounge, sipping tea from a bone china cup that clinked softly against the saucer. She nodded in agreement, her eyes filled with a pride she never directed toward her eldest daughter. Presentation is everything, darling. Cassandra, dear, perhaps you could stay in the back tomorrow. You tend to fade into the wallpaper in those sensible suits of yours. We wouldn't want to distract the investors with plainness. The insult was delivered with a casual cruelty that made Cassandra's jaw tighten, but she didn't snap back. Instead, she felt the cool weight of the tablet in her hand. On the screen, a series of red blinking icons indicated that Marcus had successfully diverted the Vane Group's internal server pings to a private cloud. The growth Bianca was so proud of was nothing more than a house of cards built on redirected debt. I'll be exactly where I need to be, Mother, Cassandra said, her voice a low, steady hum. She turned her gaze to Bianca. But before tomorrow morning, you might want to double-check the secondary audit on the London accounts. There's a discrepancy in the offshore filings that looks problematic. Bianca let out a sharp, jagged laugh that grated against the quiet of the room. She turned, her eyes flashing with a mix of pity and derision. Offshore filings? Oh, Cassie. You've spent so much time in the basement of that M&A firm that you've started seeing ghosts in the spreadsheets. Julian personally signed off on those numbers. Do you really think a mid-level partner like you knows more than the man who's been running the Vane portfolio for years? I'm suggesting you look at the source data, Bianca, Cassandra replied, her expression unreadable. Just once, for your own sake. I don't need your advice, and I certainly don't need your warnings, Bianca snapped, the silk of her dress rustling as she stepped off the pedestal. You're just jealous because for the first time in your life, you aren't the smartest person in the room. Tomorrow, Julian and I are going to be the new faces of Sterling Vane. You're just the sister who got left behind. Julian Vane entered the room then, his polished Oxfords clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. He smelled of expensive sandalwood and unearned confidence. He slid an arm around Bianca's waist, pressing a kiss to her temple while looking at Cassandra with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Still trying to play the expert, Cassandra? Julian asked, his voice dripping with condescension. I heard you were poking around the London Protocol files again. Give it a rest. The deal is locked. The board meeting is at 9, and by 10 I'll be the youngest managing director this city has seen in a decade. 9 o'clock, Cassandra repeated softly. She looked at the clock on the wall. Less than 18 hours to go. I'll be sure to be on time. Make sure you are, Julian said, turning back to his wife. It'll be a good lesson for you to see how real business is handled. Cassandra didn't stay to hear the rest of their self-congratulatory chatter. She walked out of the sunroom, the sound of their laughter following her down the hall. As she reached the foyer, her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Thorne appeared on the encrypted app. The chairman has confirmed receipt of the special agenda. He's intrigued. See you at the cliff's edge. She stepped out into the cool evening air, the sun setting behind the city's skyline in a bruise of purple and gold. She didn't feel the sting of her mother's dismissal or the heat of Bianca's insults anymore. All she felt was the calm, predatory stillness of a hunter who had already pulled the trigger and was simply waiting for the bullet to find its mark. Tomorrow, the emerald silk would be the only thing Bianca had left. Cassandra climbed into the back of her car and looked at her watch. The countdown wasn't in hours anymore. It was in heartbeats. She closed her eyes, imagining the silence that would fill the boardroom when the first slide hit the screen. It wouldn't be the London Protocol. It would be the end of everything they thought they owned. The evening of the Sterling Foundation Gala arrived with a deceptive, velvet stillness that masked the storm brewing beneath the surface. By 7 o'clock, the grand ballroom of the Pier Hotel was a sea of shimmering silk and sharp tuxedos, the air thick with the cloying scent of 5,000 imported white lilies, and the expensive, metallic tang of high-end perfume. Cassandra Sterling stood at the edge of the mezzanine, her fingers lightly grazing the cold marble railing. She wasn't wearing the emerald silk. Instead, she had chosen a gown of midnight navy, so dark it was almost black, tailored with a precision that made her look less like a socialite and more like a blade. In her small, structured clutch, the weight of a single encrypted flash drive felt heavier than a lead bar. It was the only accessory that mattered. Below her, the vultures were already circling the buffet of vanity. She spotted Bianca Vane immediately. Her sister was positioned dead center of the room, draped in the very emerald silk she had gloated over just 24 hours ago. The vibrant green fabric caught the light of the crystal chandeliers, drawing every eye in the room, exactly as intended. Bianca held a flute of vintage champagne in one hand, her head tilted back in a practiced, melodic laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Beside her, Julian Vane looked every bit the rising executive he imagined himself to be. He was preening, his chest puffed out as he spoke to a group of investors, his hand possessively resting on the small of Bianca's back. They looked like the golden couple of the Sterling Empire. "They look so happy, don't they?" Cassandra didn't turn. She knew the voice. Evelyn Sterling stepped up beside her daughter, her gaze fixed on the spectacle below. Her mother's disappointment was a familiar, suffocating perfume. "It's a shame you couldn't find something more celebratory to wear, Cassandra," Evelyn said, her voice a sharp whisper. "You look like you're attending a funeral. On a night when your sister is being named the new face of the foundation, you could at least try to look like you support her." "Maybe I am attending a funeral, Mother," Cassandra replied, her voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. "I just haven't decided whose yet." Evelyn stiffened, her mouth thinning into a hard line. "Don't be dramatic, just stay in the background tonight. Don't embarrass us. Julian has worked very hard to secure the board's favor for this transition. Don't ruin it with your intensity." Cassandra watched her mother walk away to join the winning side of the family. She felt no sting, only a cold, clinical observation of a dying breed. She checked her watch. 20 minutes until the presentation. She descended the stairs, her heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat against the marble. As she reached the floor, the crowd parted slightly. Bianca spotted her and immediately straightened, her face twisting into a smirk of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Oh, look who decided to crawl out of the shadows," Bianca said, loud enough for the nearby circle of socialites to hear. She stepped forward, the emerald silk rustling with a sound like dry leaves. She reached out, fingering the dark fabric of Cassandra's sleeve with a sneer. "Navy? Really, Cass, it's so sensible. I suppose when you know you're about to be replaced, you start dressing for the unemployment line." Julian chuckled, stepping up to Bianca's side. "Be nice, darling. Not everyone has the stature to pull off a statement piece. Some people are meant to be the backdrop." He looked at Cassandra, his eyes gleaming with the arrogance of a man who thought he'd already won the game. "I heard about the London Protocol files, Cassandra. Tough break. I guess the chairman realized that some projects require a more masculine touch." The insult was clumsy, but the surrounding guests tittered behind their hands. Cassandra didn't flinch. She leaned in slightly, the scent of Bianca's heavy floral perfume hitting her like a physical weight. "The London Protocol is exactly where it needs to be, Julian," she whispered. "And you're right about one thing, Bianca. This dress is sensible. It's easy to move in, which is helpful when you're the only one in the room who knows where the exits are." Bianca's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, her brow furrowing. "What is that supposed to? Enjoy the silk while you can," Cassandra interrupted, her smile thin and razor-sharp. "It's a very loud color. It makes it so much easier for everyone to see exactly when you start to fall." She turned and walked away before Bianca could find a comeback, weaving through the crowd toward the tech booth at the far end of the ballroom. She felt the eyes of the room on her, the pitying glances, the dismissive shrugs. They thought they were watching a shadow fade. Near the darkened corner of the stage, a tall figure stepped out from behind a pillar. Marcus Thorne didn't say a word. He simply held out a hand. Cassandra opened her clutch and placed the flash drive into his palm. His fingers brushed hers, a brief, grounding contact of cold steel and shared intent. "The chairman is seated," Marcus murmured, his voice a low rumble. "He's expecting the standard Foundation highlights. He has no idea he's about to watch an autopsy." "Is the board's secure feed live?" Cassandra asked. "Streaming to every major shareholder as we speak. They think they're watching a gala. They're about to watch a liquidation." Cassandra looked back at the center of the room. Bianca was now standing on the small riser near the podium, adjusting her hair in a nearby mirror, basking in the glow of the spotlights. Julian was shaking hands with the chairman, his face flushed with the premature heat of victory. The lights in the ballroom began to dim. The low hum of the cello quartet faded into a heavy, expectant silence. A large projection screen descended from the ceiling, glowing with the pristine white logo of the Sterling Foundation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, "please take your seats for a special presentation regarding the future of Sterling Global." Cassandra stepped back into the deepest shadows of the wings. She watched Bianca glide toward the podium, the emerald silk shimmering like a target. Her sister gripped the edges of the lectern, leaning into the microphone with a look of predatory glee. "Tonight," Bianca began, her voice amplified and echoing, "is about more than just charity. It's about the legacy we leave behind and the people we trust to protect it." Cassandra reached into her pocket and gripped her phone. She felt the vibration of a single message from Marcus. "Ready when you are." She tapped the screen. The white logo on the screen behind Bianca didn't fade into the planned promotional video. Instead, it flickered once, twice, and then snapped into a high-resolution image of a bank transfer authorization, signed by Julian Vane, dated 3 days ago, and marked with the stamp of a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The room went deathly silent. Bianca, unaware of what was happening behind her, continued to smile into the crowd. "I've spent my life preparing for this responsibility," Bianca said, her voice ringing out into a room that had suddenly stopped breathing. "And I promise you, the truth of our family's success will finally be laid bare." Cassandra leaned against the cold brick of the backstage wall and closed her eyes. "Yes," she whispered to the darkness. "It certainly will." The silence that swallowed the ballroom wasn't the respectful hush of an attentive audience. It was the suffocating stillness of a tomb. Bianca Vane stood at the center of the stage, her hand still raised in a triumphant gesture, her lips frozen in the final curve of a smile that no longer made sense. She hadn't looked behind her yet. She was still basking in the imagined glow of her own success, oblivious to the fact that the high-resolution image of the Cayman Islands bank transfer was currently illuminating the back of her designer gown like a neon sign of guilt. In the third row, Evelyn Sterling dropped her crystal flute. The sound of shattered glass rang out across the marble floor, a sharp, jagged punctuation mark to the collective gasp of the room. She stared at the screen, her face a pale mask of disbelief, her hand trembling as she reached for the pearls at her throat. Beside her, Marcus Thorne didn't move a muscle. He sat with his arms crossed, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips as he watched the inevitable collapse of the Vane dynasty. Bianca finally felt the chill. She turned, her movements slow and mechanical, as if she were afraid that moving too fast would make the nightmare real. The transformation of her face was a masterpiece of ruin. The practiced, radiant glow she had worn all evening didn't just slip. It curdled into a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. The expensive bronzer on her cheeks seemed to turn a sickly, ashen gray under the unforgiving glare of the LED stage lights. Her eyes, which had spent the night darting around the room in search of admiration, now fixed on the bank authorization with a wide, glassy stare that revealed the frantic gears of a mind, realizing it had reached the end of the track. Her lower lip began to quiver, a tiny, uncontrollable tremor that broke the smooth line of her lipstick, while her throat worked in a series of dry, desperate swallows that were picked up by the microphone she still clutched like a lifeline. The poise she wore like armor shattered, leaving her shoulders slumped and her hands shaking so violently The heavy diamond rings on her fingers caught the light in a frantic, blurred shimmer. This is a mistake, she stammered, her voice cracking, amplified by the speakers until it echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Julian Vane stood up abruptly in the VIP section, his chair screeching against the floor. He looked smaller than he had 10 minutes ago, his expensive Italian suit suddenly appearing 3 sizes too large for a man whose professional fraud was now public property. He looked toward the exit, his eyes darting like a trapped rat, but the security detail Marcus had arranged was already closing the doors. Cassandra Sterling stepped out from behind the velvet curtain. She didn't rush. She moved with the steady, predatory grace of someone who had already won the game before it started. The sound of her heels on the stage was the only noise in the room, a rhythmic, lethal beat that drew every eye toward her. She stopped 3 feet from her sister, her expression as calm and cold as a winter morning. "It's not a mistake, Bianca," she said, her voice low but perfectly clear. She didn't need to shout. The room was so quiet she could have whispered and been heard in the back row. "It's a receipt for 5 years of your arrogance and Julian's incompetence." Bianca turned to her, her eyes wild. "You did this. You've always been jealous. You're trying to ruin me." "I didn't have to ruin you," Cassandra replied, stepping closer until she could smell the expensive, cloying lily perfume her sister wore. "I just had to stop protecting you. You spent so much time telling everyone I didn't belong in this family, but you forgot one very important detail." Cassandra turned toward the audience, her gaze sweeping over the board members, the investors, and her stunned mother. She reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer and pulled out a single, gold-embossed card. She didn't hand it to Bianca. She dropped it on the floor at her sister's feet. "I don't just belong in this company," she said, her voice ringing with a finality that made Evelyn flinch. "As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, I am the majority shareholder of Sterling Global, which means you, Julian, and your entitlement are officially evicted." Bianca opened her mouth to scream, to protest, to lie, but no sound came out. She looked down at the card, then back at the screen, then at the room full of people who were now looking at her with nothing but disgusted pity. Cassandra didn't wait for a response. She didn't stay to watch the tears or the inevitable tantrum. She turned on her heel and walked off the stage, her silhouette sharp against the glowing evidence of her victory. She had delivered the truth, and now she left the wreckage behind her. The silence in the grand ballroom didn't last long. It shattered into 1,000 frantic whispers the moment Cassandra stepped off the dais. She could feel the heat of 100 gazes on her back, but she didn't turn around. She walked toward the tall, arched mahogany doors of the foyer, her stride rhythmic and unshakable. Behind her, the sound of frantic, uneven footsteps clicked against the marble, the desperate rhythm of someone who had finally realized the ground had vanished beneath them. "Cassandra! You stop right there." Bianca's voice was a jagged shard of its former self, stripped of its melodic condescension. Cassandra paused near a massive fluted pillar, the cold stone biting through the fabric of her blazer as she turned. Bianca skidded to a halt a few feet away, her chest heaving. Julian was right behind her, his face flushed a deep, mottled purple that clashed horribly with his silk tie. He looked less like a high-level executive and more like a man realizing he'd been caught with his hand in a very expensive cookie jar. Bianca's face was a ruin of carefully applied cosmetics and raw, ugly shock. The vibrant pink of her blush now sat like a bruise against skin that had turned the color of curdled cream. Her eyes, usually sharp with practiced condescension, were wide and bloodshot, darting frantically as if searching for a trapdoor in the marble floor. Her lower lip trembled, losing its fullness as she gnawed on it, and a thin sheen of sweat broke across her forehead, matting the fine hairs at her temples. The arrogance that usually held her features in a mask of superiority had melted away, leaving behind a hollow, desperate expression that made her look 10 years older in the span of a heartbeat. "That card is a fake," Bianca hissed, though her voice lacked the conviction to carry across the room. "You're bluffing. You've always been a pathetic little liar trying to steal what's mine. You think a few shares make you the boss. I'll have you arrested for fraud before the night is over." It's not a few shares, Bianca, Cassandra said, her voice dropping into a register of terrifying calm. It's 51%. I've been buying back the diluted stock you and Julian traded away for your lifestyle for the last 3 years. Every time you sold a piece of the sterling legacy to fund a summer in Saint-Tropez, I was the one on the other side of the ledger. Julian stepped forward, his finger stabbing the air between them. You can't do this, Cassandra. There are bylaws, there are protocols. I'm the chief of operations, and I'm telling you this acquisition is invalid until the board reviews it. The board? Cassandra tilted her head, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. You mean the people currently standing by the buffet, wondering if their contracts are about to be terminated? Look at them, Julian. As if on cue, Marcus Thorne stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. He held a slim leather briefcase that made a sharp, authoritative snap as he closed it. He didn't look at Bianca or Julian. He looked only at Cassandra, offering a sharp, professional nod. The injunctions have been filed, Cassandra, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly to the surrounding witnesses. The corporate accounts for Sterling Global are frozen as of 10 minutes ago. Any attempt to move funds or sign contracts will be flagged as a felony. The sound of a glass shattering echoed from the ballroom. It was Evelyn. She stood at the edge of the foyer, her hand pressed to her throat, her eyes fixed on the daughter she had spent decades dismissing. She looked at Cassandra not with love, but with a sudden, sickening realization of power. She moved toward them, her voice trembling. Cassie, honey, Evelyn started, the endearment tasting like poison on her tongue. There's no need for lawyers. This is a family matter. We can go home, sit down, and talk about how to manage the company together. Bianca was just stressed. She didn't mean. She meant every word for 20 years, Mother, Cassandra interrupted. The smell of the expensive lilies in the foyer suddenly felt suffocating, cloying like the false sentiment in Evelyn's voice. And you meant every silence. Bianca let out a shrill, hysterical laugh. You think you've won? You're still just the girl who wasn't good enough. You're a shark in a cheap suit, Cassandra. Nobody here likes you. Nobody here will work for you. Cassandra looked past her sister. Several department heads were already drifting toward Marcus, their expressions shifting from shock to calculated alignment. They knew where the gravity had shifted. One by one, the enablers were turning their backs, looking for a way to secure their own futures in the new regime. They don't have to like me, Cassandra said, stepping closer to Bianca until they were inches apart. She could smell the sharp, metallic scent of Bianca's fear through her perfume. They just have to obey me. And as for you and Julian, I've already had the locks changed at the Sterling offices. Your personal effects will be couriered to your apartment by noon tomorrow. If you set foot on company property again, security has orders to treat you as trespassers. Julian's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at the card on the floor, the gold embossing mocking him in the dim light. You're a monster, Bianca whispered, her voice cracking. No, Cassandra replied, turning her back on them for the final time. I'm the owner, and the owner is leaving. She walked out into the cool night air, the heavy doors thudding shut behind her with a sound like a gavel. She didn't wait to see the tears. She didn't stay to hear the excuses. She stepped into the waiting car, the weight of the Sterling name finally feeling like a crown instead of a shroud. The reckoning was complete, and for the first time in her life, the silence was exactly what she wanted. The transition from the boardroom coup to total corporate restructuring was a bloodless massacre. Within 48 hours, Marcus Thorne had finalized the legal transfer of every disputed asset, leaving Julian Vane with nothing but a severance package that barely covered his outstanding country club dues. Bianca Vane's attempts to freeze the estate through emergency injunctions were laughed out of court, her reputation as a socialite proving a poor shield against Cassandra's ironclad documentation. Their mother, Evelyn Sterling, had retreated to a private sanatorium, claiming nervous exhaustion to avoid the public shame of her favorite daughter's downfall. The Sterling name remained on the building, but the spirit of the company had been purged of its toxic entitlement. Cassandra didn't just win, she erased the world they had built on her back. 6 months later, The glass walls of the Sterling penthouse office reflected a city that had finally learned to stop whispering. Cassandra Sterling stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the scent of expensive sandalwood and fresh rain clinging to the air. She adjusted the cuff of her charcoal blazer, her movements precise and unhurried. The silence of the office was no longer the heavy, suffocating kind she'd endured in her youth. It was the quiet of a well-oiled machine. Below her, the morning traffic of the financial district hummed, a rhythmic pulse that she now controlled. Marcus Thorne entered, his footsteps muffled by the thick wool rug. He didn't need to speak to convey the morning's victory. He simply laid a tablet on the mahogany desk, showing the final liquidation of Julian's remaining shell companies. "It's done," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "The last of the creditors finished with them this morning. They're out of the Heights. I believe the new address is a 2-bedroom rental in the industrial district, right above a dry cleaner." Cassandra didn't smile. The satisfaction wasn't a spark. It was a slow, steady heat. "And Bianca?" "Selling her jewelry," he replied, leaning against the edge of the desk. "The Cartier collection went to auction yesterday. It barely covered the back taxes and the legal fees Julian racked up trying to sue the board. She tried to keep the engagement ring, but the bank had a different opinion." A memory flickered, Bianca laughing as she flaunted a diamond tennis bracelet, calling it too refined for Cassandra's workmanlike wrists. Now, that same refined gold was likely sitting in a velvet tray, waiting for a stranger's bid. Later that afternoon, she found herself near the downtown transit hub, a place the old Sterling family would have considered beneath their notice. She sat in the back of her car, watching through tinted glass as a woman struggled with a heavy, overflowing grocery bag near a bus stop. It was her. Bianca Vane looked smaller, the sharp edges of her beauty blunted by the humidity and the visible strain of a life without staff. Her hair, once a masterpiece of salon engineering, was pulled back in a fraying elastic. Beside her, Julian looked gray, his shoulders slumped in a designer suit that was starting to lose its shape and shine. He was arguing with a bus driver, his gestures frantic and entitled, but the driver simply closed the door and pulled away, leaving them in a cloud of acrid diesel exhaust. The face of the woman who had once poured wine over Cassandra's dress was now a mask of pure, unadulterated exhaustion. Bianca's mouth opened in a silent snarl at her husband, her finger pointing toward the heavy bag that had just split at the seam, spilling cheap canned goods across the wet pavement. There were no cameras here, no socialites to perform for. Just the grit of the sidewalk and the realization that the world didn't owe her an audience. Cassandra watched as her sister knelt to pick up a rolling tin of beans, her designer heels clicking uselessly on the concrete. Returning to the Sterling estate that evening, Cassandra found a letter waiting on the silver tray in the foyer. The handwriting was elegant, shaky, and unmistakably Evelyn S. "I hope you're happy," it read, the paper smelling faintly of the same floral perfume her mother had worn when she told a 10-year-old Cassandra to stay in the shadows so Bianca could shine. "You have the company, the house, and the money, but you have no sister and you have no mother. Was it worth the price of the throne?" Cassandra set the paper down. She walked to the grand piano in the ballroom, the room where the reckoning had begun. The house was hers. The legacy was secure. She had protected the name from the people who would have burned it for a moment of vanity. She sat on the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. She had won everything. She had delivered the karma they had spent a lifetime earning. But as she looked at the empty, silent house, she felt the true weight of the Sterling crown. It was cold, heavy, and perfectly solitary. She was the owner of the empire, and for the first time, she realized that the silence she had fought so hard for was the only thing she had left.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.